Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of sources and zero in on the most important nuggets of knowledge.
Uh-huh.
Today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating historical look at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, or PATA, as most people know it.
Right, Pato. It comes up a lot in tourism history for that region.
Exactly. And you shared some really detailed material on its founding, how it evolved, the challenges it's faced over the years, and its impact, really, on travel in a pretty crucial region.
Yeah, it's a rich history. Our mission here, I guess, is to unpack all that, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising facts from the sources you've given us.
Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding a key player, a major force in the history of travel and tourism in, well, one of the world's most dynamic regions.
It really is dynamic, and the story, it kind of adapts, it navigates all this turbulence, always trying to connect this vast, complex area.
And the sources say it all kicked off with a very specific problem faced by one well-traveled individual. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So the sources lay out pretty clearly that PATA emerged as this significant force in Pacific Asia travel and tourism.
Definitely.
Initially, it seemed primarily focused on just, well, promoting travel to the region, right?
Yeah, that was the start. But it's clearly evolved, significantly over time. It became this not-for-profit, working closely with airlines, governments, its members, of course, and international agencies, too.
The core goal, as the sources describe it anyway, was to help the region develop a tourism industry, one that could effectively match its incredible sites and services with, the necessary marketing expertise.
That's a great way to put it. It wasn't just about having something amazing to see, but figuring out how to actually bring people there, how to market it.
And it seems like it pretty quickly became this leading travel association, representing the whole region globally. You can almost see the trajectory in just the sheer variety of initiatives mentioned in the sources over the years. Everything from like early visitor certificates to these huge global events, awards, conferences.
And later, things like bolstering safety and environmental programs came in, too.
Right. And now they're heavily into online content, data hubs, even investigative news features.
But the real spark, that Genesis moment the sources point to, it's this guy, Robert E. Ruff.
Bob Ruff, okay.
He was representing Air New Zealand over in the U.S. and was just apparently completely frustrated because visitor arrivals to New Zealand were reportedly only hitting like 20% of their target.
Wow. Only 20%. That's a massive miss.
Yeah.
And his annoyance, it went beyond just the low numbers.
Oh, absolutely. The sources say he was particularly bothered by what he saw as these short-term fixes, things coming from governments and airlines.
Right.
These fixes seem to ignore the attempt and journey so far, as the source puts it. They just weren't addressing the underlying structural issues that were really holding back growth in a meaningful way.
So he was stuck on this fundamental question. How could you possibly make travel to the Pacific affordable for potentially millions of Americans?
Yeah. He observed that travel to other major continents was relatively developed, but, well, not so much for the South Pacific. It was lagging behind.
And this frustration, it kind of fueled his successful move to position PIA as an international non-governmental agency.
Exactly. Its specific focus, the way he framed it, was uncovering the Pacific Asia tourism product for air travel.
That really underscores that initial vital link between PATA's mission and the aviation industry. It was fundamentally about enabling that journey, wasn't it?
It had to be. Before PATA, the sources highlight these major challenges. Just fragmentation across the whole region, shortcomings that made air travel expensive and crucially inaccessible for a lot of people.
Yeah. The creation of a business tourism office specifically for Hawaii is even cited as sort of an acknowledgement that previous collective Pacific efforts had, well, maybe failed.
And that failure was apparently made worse, the sources suggest, once lower fares to Hawaii became available. That made collective efforts for the entire region even harder.
Right, because why coordinate if you can just get a cheap flight to the one place?
Exactly. It raises the idea that maybe other destinations in the Pacific, facing similar isolation and expense, needed a PATA even more than Hawaii did at that point.
The sources paint this picture of Hawaii travel products being really complex and interdependent, a horde of local establishments, all trying to make things work. While success pretty much hinged on the consistent arrival of, and I love this quote, Plane 8 from Pan America.
That quote really brings it to life, doesn't it? Both the local effort and just how dominant that airline connection was back then.
Totally. Okay, so fast forward a bit, the year 2000. That marked PETA's Golden Jubilee and also a pretty significant strategic refresh.
Yeah, this led to the launch of PetaVision 2004. It was a 4-year plan specifically designed to examine the industry megatrends that were impacting Asia-Pacific tourism development at the time.
And the sources kind of framed this as ushering in a new strategic phase for PETA, focusing on things like vision, professionalism, communities, best practice.
Exactly. They structured this new phase around 4 cornerstone initiatives, looking at travel industry groups of the future, developing products and destinations, communities of interest, focusing on technology and structure, and implementing quality control certification and standards. Pretty comprehensive.
And this strategic direction was then formalized in their corporate plan, which was based on approved budgets and analysis of these initiatives and led to the formal mission and vision statements.
Right. The first draft of the mission statement, which was approved as a working document, aimed to reflect PETA's core purpose, promoting effective tourism in the Asia-Pacific region.
They clearly understood tourism as this dynamic, rapidly growing force, benefiting customers, suppliers, and societies, not just one or the other.
And PETA's defined role within that whole ecosystem was really to promote and facilitate tourism development, primarily by servicing its members, but ultimately for the benefit of the industry as a whole and, importantly, the region's people and economies.
What's particularly highlighted in the sources as a key element of this mission is the emphasis on community involvement.
Yes. They call this key to destination development PETA's unique selling proposition and core competency. So it wasn't just about getting tourists to visit places, it was fundamentally linked to engaging the communities within those destinations.
They aimed to provide the best value to members through what they called symbiotic partnerships with innovators and leaders, all geared towards sustainable, quality growth with workshops and a real focus on member communities.
It sounds like a real push for collaborative benefit, not just top-down directives telling people what to do.
Absolutely. The source is making clear that PETA wasn't just some abstract idea that appeared out of nowhere. It was, and I quote, forged by regional and global forces during what's described as a birth and boom moment for Pacific Asian tourism.
Yeah, born in 1951, its objectives were really rooted in that post-war environment. Promote and develop the industry via cooperative efforts among all the different players, tourism boards, airlines, shipping companies, agents, transport providers, accommodation, the whole lot.
It was convened by the widow of Thomas H. Teasdale from the Hong Kong Tourist Association, starting with just 24 participants from 9 nations and territories signing on.
Very small beginnings.
Right. It began as a voluntary trade association, but critically was quickly magnified, guided, and professionalized into a powerful organization by its early executive director and director of development.
What's fascinating here is the context, the post-WWII landscape in Asia, and how the sources say it fundamentally altered the political and tourist landscape. Areas like Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong were under foreign rule or colonialism.
Right. The sources mention things like the Japanese Empire having excised Korea and Okinawa Prefecture being excised into the U.S. for pacification and decolonization. Post-war, many territories remained occupied, and militarized regimes emerged in Taiwan and South Korea after the Korean War.
And you saw this broad shift, didn't you? From pre-war European colonialism in the region towards what the sources term U.S. neocolonialism, with decolonialization movements often repressed amid the whole Cold War dynamic.
Japan's return to the Western fold after its defeat was also huge, becoming this critical buffer zone. The defeat effectively ended almost half a century of what the sources describe as vibrant and cosmopolitan tourism development in the basin.
However, and this is interesting, the sources then make a seemingly counterintuitive point. They state that these new circumstances, despite all the political complexity and difficulty, actually enlighten the possibility of mass tourism.
So the upheaval somehow created an opportunity.
It seems so. The geopolitical realignments and post-war developments, perhaps unintentionally, created new conditions that PETA was basically established to capitalize on.
One of the things that makes PETA unique, according to the sources, is its membership structure. It's been successfully restructured since '51, starting with just 10 founding members, but growing significantly to over 800 members from over 80 countries now.
It's described as having this unique, multi-layered system designed specifically to serve professionals at all levels of the industry, not just the big players.
The sources list various categories. Private sector, that's airlines, cruise lines, hotels, tour ops. Then government, like national tourism offices. Affiliate members, which are regional intergovernmental bodies. Allied members industry support like PR firms, publications, education, honorary, and student members too.
And then there's the PATA corporates category for these big international firms with broad interest and commitment who pay tiered dues based on their size or involvement, presumably.
Yeah. What's particularly interesting and highlighted as unique is the foundation membership scheme.
Oh, right. Tell me about that one.
These organizations pay the highest dues, sign long-term contracts, and in return, they qualify for a direct role in PATA administration, including positions on the board and committees.
Wow, so real influence.
But it's invitation only. The association has discretion over who gets offered that.
Okay. That structure, then, with its diverse membership across destinations, operators, support services, that's seen as a real strength, right?
Definitely. It allows destination members, for example, to draw on the private sector's experience to tackle complex issues they might be facing.
And it provides a basis for PATA to offer assistance to less affluent or developing destinations through a multifaceted approach. The sources note this membership base is also used for crucial filtering mechanisms, like, say, fund disbursement.
Right.
And ensuring discussion happens base-wide before major decisions are made.
Which gives them an advantage, presumably, over organizations lacking such extensive resources or that kind of diverse input.
And the benefits of membership are tailored, numerous, administered by full-time management, and reviewed regularly through surveys and the membership committee.
Yeah, the sources give examples like Allied members getting free ads in PATA Compass, news entries, inclusion guides, access to the member list, preferential event rates.
All members benefit too, right? Access to the PATA library, discounts on media advertising, getting all the publications, reduced fees for seminars and conferences.
And they actively seek feedback through these issue papers on topics like environment, marketing, technology, regulation. The membership portal is highlighted as providing access to an extensive range of exclusive resources.
They're clearly described as a major driver of impactful initiatives, with in-depth research and exclusive content being key cornerstones.
That new initiative sounds interesting. The Data and Insights Hub, offering destination data, reports, analyst insights, exclusive access to data from over 21 destinations.
Yeah, plus links to external data and curated articles. It sounds like a serious information resource.
Plus other things like customized videos from event footage and free access to research reports and white papers. And of course, the events portfolio is a major pillar, offering discounted rates and, well, unrivaled networking and industry knowledge exposure.
It's a comprehensive package, really, built on that powerful, diverse network.
PATA's history is also deeply connected to its annual conferences, starting with the very first one held in Jakarta, Indonesia, way back in April 1952.
And that event even included pre- and post-conference tours, right? Bali, Jakarta.
Yeah. This came about after a pro tem committee meeting in New York City in June '51. They sent a letter out to nearly 500 tourism executives asking for support and funds and announcing this conference planned for April '52 in Jakarta, conveniently aligning with a meeting the Indonesian government was already planning.
Clever timing. And the response was significant.
Over 150 letters received, and 63 people actually attended, representing various tourism organizations. They presented the report from that pro tem meeting, read a draft constitution, and recommended and approved the name. Pacific Area Travel Association. PATA was born.
And then a follow-up meeting with government reps discussed activities, industry responsibilities.
There's even this interesting little detail that the idea of appointing a world ambassador of goodwill came up. A hotel owner fluent in Chinese was suggested for the role.
That's great. An executive committee was appointed then.
Yes, and their first sanctioned meeting was held in Bali, making arrangements for pre-conference tours there. This early period also showed a clear understanding of needing to work with media. That led to the PATA Consumers Committee focused on outbound tourism.
And destination films by delegates were even presented at an international travel and trade conference. HQ worked with TV networks. They were hitting the ground running on promotion.
The sources mentioned that changes in geography and the broader travel environment later necessitated a re-examination of policy and structure, aiming for restoration, sustainability, equity, resilience, all those things.
Which led to the first comprehensive restructuring of the executive committee and the adoption of the first official bylaws. So adapting early on.
From those modest beginnings, the first formal PATA conference was held in May 1955 at the Hawaiian Hotel in Honolulu, less than 2 years after founding. Enlisting delegates for that one was apparently an immense task.
I bet. A promotional banner campaign was organized for airlines. The Hawaii governor officially opened it on the balcony.
The goal for the over 1,500 delegates was simply to get Hawaii. The opening day was dedicated to the island's films, slides, pictures, Hawaiian dance, the works.
Then the 1962 conference in Manila was notable for introducing the first ever delegate fee, hosted 800 delegates from 33 countries.
And there's also this quirky detail about some members supposedly building a shack 57 years later just to peddle Pade badges. Don't know how true that is, but it's in the source.
It has a bit of color. The conferences have traveled the world since then, transitioning to full digital presentations by 1999 and becoming, by 2000 in Tokyo with almost 1,800 delegates, one of the world's largest travel gatherings at the time.
Moving on to keynote speakers and themes. The early assumption was the Secretaries General would carry the weight, but that first Hawaii conference brought in important external figures.
Right, but that trend was briefly derailed, the sources say, by the excesses of the 1964 conference, described as a cringeworthy parade of self-importance. Ouch.
Yeah, sounds like it. Once past that, a 20-year odyssey began, where Secretaries General like McAuliffe, Minton, Packer, and Wyndham spoke longer and more in depth.
McAuliffe is noted as particularly influential. He addressed destination member concerns in a non-news style, which seemed to resonate better.
The idea was to recruit the best speakers from responsible tourism industry functions, with Bob Vivi Scully highlighted for embracing this and bringing credibility.
They aimed for friendly faces, tackling burning issues with captivating voices. The 1996 Sydney conference, with 900 attendees, is noted for a novel approach using an enormous number of video screens. Trying new things.
The sources contrast moments of conventionally beautiful but deadpan approaches returning later versus thoughts from the heartland and more memorable moments. The arrival of mobile phones brought newer thoughts.
And there was a grand statement about the necessity for the Pacific to understand the affairs of Northern Asia, so broadening the scope.
The Tokyo conference, though, was described as intimately condensed and focused more immediately on PADA's own internal affairs.
It gives you a real sense of how the conferences, beyond just gathering people, reflected shifts in the industry's focus and PADA's priorities over the decades. They weren't static.
Not at all. And speaking of shifts, sustainability has clearly become increasingly critical for the industry. Pollution, emissions, climate change. And the sources show PADA has definitely grappled with this challenge.
Yeah, it's seen as a significant hurdle, obviously, but also a source of new opportunities, if handled right.
For tourism development to be truly sustainable, it needs to simultaneously consider environmental, economic, and sociocultural aspects. It's a balancing act.
The sources strongly emphasize the need for a common platform for joint effort towards a sustainable and responsible framework. Collaboration is key.
PADA took a leading role in 2007, organizing the first ever PADA Forum on ecotourism in Muscat, Oman. Over 350 people attended, with the goal of devising a multi-jurisdiction framework for partnership.
And back in 2000, they had already outlined their Vice in 2020, stating PADA's aim to provide meaningful assistance to its members in developing sustainable tourism.
The sources note substantial achievements in this area, but also these wide-ranging challenges across the Pacific and Asia, which underscore the need for forums to review, discuss, debate accomplishments, and future hurdles.
The historical context for this sustainability push within tourism goes back decades, doesn't it? Notably, the 1972 Stockholm Conference, and even more so, the 1992 Rio Earth Summit.
Right. The sources call Rio a watershed moment for the sustainability debate, where the tourism industry specifically became a target for conservationist concerns.
Looking at PATE's specific initiatives for sustainability, in the early 80s, they started programs stimulating regional liaisons between national tourist offices. There was this growing realization that connecting economic development directly to tourism promotion was maybe more effective than just giving financial grants to governments.
Makes sense. In 1984, they initiated study tours for development planners in member countries and created an in-house unit to prepare case studies linking tourism to other sectors like agriculture, fisheries.
They even got financial support for a study tour on tourism and environmental protection management with the Australian Tourist Commission.
This led to the first in-house technical assistance program in 1987. Then, in the late 90s, they invested significant time and funds into sustainable tourism development initiatives, including a strategic planning meeting in Hawaii in 97, and a workshop at the 99 conference in Christchurch.
A Sustainable Development Directorate was officially established at the Bangkok HQ in 2000. They co-organized two major sustainable tourism events in Bali in 2002 and 2004, which helped develop a global sustainable tourism policy framework. followed by an event in Bhutan in 2006.
Okay, so they're doing all this foundational work, driving initiatives, and then the sources state that after a very lengthy period where PATA was no longer publicly active in this specific area, all related initiatives were handed over to United Nations organizations in 2006.
Right.
What does that handover tell us about PATA's role or maybe its limitations in directly implementing sustainability programs on that scale?
That's a really interesting point the sources make. It definitely seems to signal a strategic shift for PETA in this area. Their future role in sustainability, as reflected in discussions at the 2023 annual summit, is explicitly described as focusing renewed capacities on stimulating and guiding discussions.
Ah, so facilitating rather than doing.
Exactly, rather than being the doer on the ground.
So moving from direct implementation to facilitating the conversation.
Yep.
The special seminar at the 2023 summit examining supply-side issues across Asia-Pacific and SI's small island developing states, that seems like a clear example of this new approach then.
It does. The sources also highlight PETA's efforts to build partnerships with NGOs to bridge those gaps between tourism and conservation. They mention linkages with organizations like a bird conservation group in Japan, Wetlands International, WWF, the Nature Conservancy.
And they worked with national tourism organizations in targeted countries, promoting ideas like World Bank involvement. Within PETA, an environmental consultancy, Generational Solutions, was nominated as the link with UNEP, and they sought an active partnership with UNESCO.
They commissioned discussions with NGOs in Pacific Asia, coordinating wildlife proposals, discussing PETA's role in conservation projects. Initiatives in member countries with strong links to regional tourism organizations were also initiated.
Inputs for focusing on the Pacific and the American region were appreciated. Student interns worked on topics for customized meetings. The sources state these suggestions were addressed and taken into consideration.
And PETA intends to continue working on these initiatives despite the changing world scenario. So even with that pivot away from direct implementation, the conversation and collaboration efforts in sustainability clearly continue.
Okay, let's shift gears to marketing. Getting the word out has always been critical for PATA, obviously. The sources describe how early advertisements used various strategies.
Yeah, a common one was just publishing articles in tourism publications about PATA projects or member activities. Basic PR, really.
Another approach was direct mail, sending postcards, pamphlets to foreign travel agencies and writers.
This direct mail approach was carried out regularly for about 20 years, apparently, and evolved into more sophisticated, focused campaigns, using techniques like storytelling, metaphors, positioning, mnemonic devices on slogans, getting creative.
While effective at different times, some of these methods became restricted or less effective more recently. But the sources specifically highlight one particular marketing strategy as the most important examined. The legend or story of Miryung and Muru and Naryung, devised in 1974.
Miryung and Muru and Naryung. Okay, that sounds intriguing. What was that about?
The theme was basically somewhere or something to be discovered, a concept the sources say was very much in vogue in 1974.
Ah, that sense of mystery and exploration.
Exactly. It was featured briefly without the legend at a 74 event in Seattle, but the full legend became the theme for the 75 event in San Francisco.
And the sources say it was further elaborated and most effectively used at the 1976 Pattaya Convention in Honolulu, which was the best attended one up to that point.
The successful and imaginative use of this Miryung story was seen as highly effective in generating interest in the Pacific Asia region.
The handling in 76 was noted as much better than 75, with excellent talking points and ways for delegates to participate. The sources emphasize that using this discovery legend fostered individual construction and expectation, making a location feel infused with meaning and emotion for potential travelers.
That Honolulu convention is also noted as being particularly well-run and enjoyable. It really shows the power of using narrative, even a devised legend, in early tourism marketing, to create that emotional connection.
Absolutely. And speaking of ambitious marketing, PATA also embarked on large-scale collaborative campaigns. In 1973, they launched this ambitious 5-year campaign called Pacific Asia, Land of a Million Smiles, promoted in 47 countries.
Land of a Million Smiles. That's a memorable slogan. The sources describe it as their first collaborative multi-market promotion and call it groundbreaking and well ahead of its time.
The objectives were ambitious, too, aiming beyond just image to actually increase visitor arrivals, in close cooperation with destination members. The focus was presenting Pacific Asia as exotic, offering quality tourism at affordable prices.
Now, the sources also include a really notable observation about this campaign. They state that without denying proximity to troubled areas, The strategy slanted emphasis on it being a fun, friendly destination enjoyed by American tourists.
Okay.
And while it had positive short-term results, this approach, quote, contributed to the disregard of broader regional political concerns and economic trends. That's a really striking point, that success came partially by downplaying difficult realities. How did PETA navigate that tension?
It's a fascinating tension the sources highlight. The campaign operated on two levels: inbound promotions about the region itself and outbound promotions of members in their home countries. Preparation involved meticulous research and effective coordination.
The Land of a Million Smiles slogan was indeed highly effective. The initial audience included members, employees, media, later expanding to tourism enterprises from emerging countries. But the primary initial audience, travel trade professionals. That small but influential segment responsible for actually making the sales.
Intended exposure was broad mass media, electronic media, travel trade, journalism, promotional materials, direct distribution, meetings, conventions. It was a massive, coordinated effort. And the source's note on its potential blind spots is a key insight into the complexities of marketing a region with such diverse political realities back then.
Let's look at PETA's information backbone now, particularly its research and publications. PETA founded 51 Honolulu, HQ shifts over time, Bangkok 78, San Jose 2008, evolved its name, became UN-affiliated, non-political, non-racial.
The sources mention membership numbers around 800 members from over 80 countries, although one section notes 63. The key takeaway is its broad regional representation, regardless of the exact number at any given time.
A core aim outlined in the sources is collecting, interpreting, and disseminating information. They've been involved in various projects like the Pacific Region Traffic Convention and even helping establish organizations like the World Organization Airline Associations and the WHO.
The sources highlight PETA's work on macro and micro dimensions of tourism, social impact studies, the role of its volunteer structure. General meetings provided forums to discuss member problems, and they established the PETA Award for Contributions way back in 1958.
Over time, the organization shifted towards a more business-oriented structure.
A major part of this information backbone, and a key contribution, according to the sources, is their market research reports. PETA aimed to be the leading voice on the issues that matter, putting great emphasis on sourcing, generating, and distributing travel data, statistics, reports, guides, all that stuff.
At the apex of this are their in-depth research reports on destinations, source markets, or specific topics, available in their library and a growing database of other organizations' reports. These are distributed to members and non-members, ensuring the work reaches the people who actually need it.
PETA's research reports are consistently ranked at the top of their publications. The most successful and a real point of pride mentioned was the annual Asia-Pacific Travel Demand Forecast, conceived in 1970.
This was developed as a joint PETASCAP publication, that's the UN's Economic and Social Commission for the region, based on econometric models. The sources say it quickly gained acceptance and credibility. And the predictions for 1980 were found to be remarkably accurate, earning PETA a special commendation.
Early on, they discussed the necessity for these forecasts, the requests coming in, the tools and methods needed. An initial report on the situation and trends was decided upon, preceded by a questionnaire asking members about their aspirations for future development. A plentiful set of tools and methods was gathered concurrently.
Now, of course, ongoing forecasting is handled by international and national bodies with significant resources. The sources note that guides on tools and methods cover complex things like destination choice studies, length of stay analysis, mode choice, particularly in the Western Pacific, utilizing comprehensive databases.
Looking at broader industry insights and trends that PETA focused on, the sources note that the industry and the organizations representing it are constantly changing. Crises force relevant actors to reconsider their intelligence tools. PETA actively drew attention to important trends in world tourism.
Some particularly important trends highlighted include the consolidation of destination brands and providers leading to oligopoly and market saturation, the evolving psychological profile of travelers as experienced, sophisticated consumers, the increasing incorporation of new technologies, reprivatization, financialization, the rise of new hot destinations with carefully designed experiences, and the gradual homogenization of demand. Lots going on.
The sources also pose an interesting question about PETA's early marketing during the post-war boom and the rise of hotel chains. They ask if PETA treated the destination as an entire package, perhaps considering interdestination competition negligible at that point.
And they suggest this approach could have had unexpected implications for tourist perspectives.
They describe an early blankness and ignorance of competing APAC destinations in brochures, arguing it wasn't rationally reasonable to compare such dissimilar products.
Yeah.
Only ignorant or inexperienced travelers would see them as interchangeable. This is described as a unique condition of space-time, which has now vanished.
That's a key insight. That early period was fundamentally different. You couldn't just compare apples and oranges easily.
Yes, and the sources state that growing competition later put significant pressure on that destination combination arrangement. Current conditions, in contrast, are characterized by the complexity of digitalization, increased competitiveness, multiple paths forward, and sustainable development acting as a crucial boundary condition. PETA's information efforts have clearly had to adapt to this vastly more complex environment.
PETA also organized itself geographically through regional chapters. These are described as crucial for enabling members to work closely with PETA staff, each other, governments, suppliers, tourist boards, the whole network.
They are organized through 26 regional bodies aligning with UN geographic regions, covering vast areas: Asia-Pacific, North America, Europe, Africa, Middle East. The Asia-Pacific region itself includes major markets like China, India, Japan.
This structure is described as PETA's global regionalism, an attempt to ensure something is provided for everyone by catering to a variety of organizations and establishing national and local networks.
The sources note that while the basic concept didn't proceed smoothly, regionalism brought the need for change and highlighted certain ineffectiveness. National initiatives became contagious, with concern for achievable results prominent in the executive board's adaptation.
Now, here's a really striking line from the source regarding regionalism. It enlarged the number of actors, enabling national tourism boards to implement colonialism. That's a powerful and, well, controversial statement. How did that dynamic play out? What does the source mean by implement colonialism here?
That is a strong statement, isn't it? The sources don't extensively detail the how in that specific line, but it appears within the context of discussing PETA's horizontal structure. They say the structure made it difficult for more exotic or smaller destinations to promote themselves effectively against the huge suppliers or dominant players. So it seems to imply a power imbalance where the structure, while increasing the number of actors, may have inadvertently allowed larger national entities or interests to exert control or influence over smaller ones, perhaps in ways that resemble colonial power dynamics. That seems to be the implication.
So even with the push for regional identity, there were inherent tensions and power struggles baked in.
Exactly. The sources state that development had to advance on two fronts: strengthening regional bodies' autonomy while simultaneously reining them in for consistency and coherency, specifically to avoid issues like insulting executives or diverting fees. A balancing act.
As these regional bodies became more established, they expanded towards global outreach, each corresponding to a global geopolitical region. Existing members were invited to choose their represented countries, and new entities were formed for areas without representation, like West Africa.
Focusing on the Asia-Pacific region specifically, PETA started fundamentally as a regional association dealing with source and destination issues, advocating standards like safety and health. It remains, according to the sources, truly regional in its membership base.
The first official chapter was in Sydney, Australia. In 1953, the board officially endorsed the principle of regional representation, recognizing the need for a degree of autonomy and anticipating membership growth.
The first established regions were the Asia mainland, Pacific Island, and Eastern Pacific, initially under board supervision with staff management, but requiring board member representation.
A stocktaking in 1976 revealed significant frustration from regions due to a lack of autonomy. Representatives wanted full board representation, not just regional supervision.
This directly led to restructuring the regional organization for more active participation. Regional chairpersons gained more autonomy, and the Regions Committee was formed as a self-governing body. Regional identity was enhanced for publicity purposes.
Currently, PETA has 23 first-level chapters and 7 second-level chapters, managing regional affairs and income. They play a role in appointing board members and subcommittee chairpersons and are consulted on regional secretariats and HQ staff. The regional officers handle executive business on a self-managing basis now.
As for global outreach, the sources tie this to the mid-1970s and 80s. During that period of significant APAC economic growth and modernization, fueled by American, Japanese, European foreign investments, regional governments were actively trying to build basic infrastructure roads, hotels to attract private tourism investment.
This period saw rapid changes in tourism, accompanied by a liberalization of foreign tourism restrictions and an increase in regional tourists traveling overseas. Things are really starting to move.
An initiative was proposed to form a travel association specifically to solicit support from influential foreign travel trade organizations abroad and provide them with an exclusive venue to visit Pacific Asia, bringing the region's tourism potentials to their attention, kind of like a focused sales pitch.
This resulted in 8 influential travel trade organizations representing 7 destinations signing and adopting the Articles of Incorporation on February 15, 1951. The first president was Louis C. Wu, then managing director of the Hawaii Visitors Bureau.
Briefly after, in 1952, they co-sponsored and organized the first Pacific Airlines Route Planning Conference in San Francisco with the Pacific Airlines Association, again solidifying that link between PATA and enabling air travel connections.
In early '53, efforts began to set up a PATA office in San Francisco, specifically for promotion. The goals were to expand and diversify promotional effectiveness through coordinated participation in fairs, promotions, fam tours, and to exploit the potentials of new technologies even back then.
Similar efforts were made to amend bylaws to allow active participation of government and other travel institutions, reflecting a recognition that growth required broader buy-in and structure. They couldn't do it alone.
While PATA's vision is centered on a responsible tourism industry, where individuals contribute to society and economy, its primary focus and mandate, according to the sources, has been the development of the APAC region as a whole.
They've put significant emphasis on both destinations and the demand and supply markets, particularly during that massive shift of global tourism demand towards APAC in the 1980s. Economic engines and master plans, like the one for Kota Kinabalu, were successfully developed and remain sustainable today.
The sources mention local residents being trained as human resources, infrastructure is being developed. Thailand's willingness to accommodate travelers, a factor in the success of their amazing Thailand campaign, is cited as a key example of how combining governmental and private sector efforts can lead to a more sustainable industry.
A key point the sources make about PATA's impact is that it unbound APAC destinations from what they term footloose tour operators and travel agents, who, the sources claim, argued for destinations retaining only small tourist spending and increasing dubious products and services. What was that conflict about exactly? How did PATA tackle it?
It sounds like a definite pushback against potentially exploitative tourism practices. This linked to, say, an international conference in Thailand in 1990 specifically discussed this issue, inviting both private and public sectors from source markets to hash it out.
They agreed on immediate and longer-term targets, which solidified the image of the destinations as more viable and genuine. Direct airline access was demanded from source markets, illustrating a concern about these markets introducing additional costs for destinations they deemed non-viable.
The sources note that less promoted but beautiful islands, with lagoons and beaches, were successfully promoted through PATA's efforts. And efforts were made to ensure that planned developments didn't spoil the destinations. Sustainable thinking, even then.
Contests were even held for public awareness, like Cleanest Beach Awards and culinary exhibitions, linking local quality directly to the tourism product. Smart.
PATA was also keen to introduce and develop the region's transport modes, including air transport. Although they reportedly waited years to comment, seeing it primarily as a private sector issue, it eventually created major concerns within the association.
An emergency meeting was held in 1991, a task force appointed. This led to the development of new routes and products, but the sources highlight a lack of incentives to entice the various players into cross-border cooperation. Always a challenge.
This situation resulted in a resolution for consultation among competitors and encouraging coordination, ultimately leading to the establishment of Charter Asia, with amended blueprints aimed at fostering fair competition. It shows how PATA engaged with complex, sometimes contentious issues impacting local economies and the region's transportation backbone.
Like any long-standing organization, PATA has faced a myriad of challenges over its 70-plus years. The sources mention everything from economic downturns, wars, disasters, endemic issues. Each era brought increasingly complex issues, and PATA adapted creatively, they say.
But they add, nothing can compare to the challenge of a global pandemic.
No kidding. Looking at economic downturns first, the sources state PETA wasn't immune. The first major crisis affecting its work was in the late 1970s. Following those worldwide oil crises of 73 and 79, which caused dramatic price surges and impacted the global economy massively.
This hit the airline industry hard, right? Airlines adjusted using smaller, energy-saving planes, reducing services, raising fares, cutting routes due to operational losses.
The impact on the travel industry in the Pacific Asia region was significant. From 73 to 75, interconnected international scheduled services dropped by over 10%. North America to APAC decreased 18%, and intra-regional APAC was hit hardest with a 14% decrease. Hotel occupancy plummeted between 75 and 78. Grim numbers.
Despite this recession, the sources make the point that PETA's growth remained comparatively positive. Their strategy in the late 70s was two-pronged.
What were they?
First, stop funding expansion and establishment of new facilities. Second, focus intensely on improving operational efficiency, reducing expenses, and promoting better income through membership fees. Basically, tighten the belt and focus inwards.
So they prioritize damage control and internal strengthening over expensive external promotions like big ad campaigns or large fam trips. Cost control was implemented from late 75, with fiscal units setting exponential target budgets. Very disciplined.
Then came the unprecedented challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. Severe disruptions worldwide. Travel and tourism, as we all know too well, were the most severely affected. Countries closed borders, airlines stopped, hotels closed, agencies went bankrupt. The sources note very few sectors escaped the impact.
The scale is just stark. IATA estimated a 67% decline in world passenger demand in 2020, international travel down 75%. IMF estimated accommodation usage fell almost 70%. The pandemic brought successive waves of decrease in travel and tourism supply, adversely affecting the bulk of the industry.
And APAC was no exception, being severely affected. The sources mentioned that researcher-friendly borders in some countries resulted in significant arrival decreases, over 90% drop in some cases.
Yeah.
Hotels gathered dust, small hotels closed, staff left resort islands.
The sources note that this often meant small businesses were replaced by bigger units, local bars and restaurants by international chains. A real consolidation driven by crisis.
And for less developed destinations, the losses were particularly devastating, meaning the loss of work for absolutely everyone involved in the phenomenon called tourism. A stark phrase.
The sources note that destinations that could reinvent tourism during lockdown loosening gained a competitive advantage. Some regions managed COVID waves faster, welcomed tourists sooner.
The sources state that APAC, in the second half of 2021, became acutely aware of this missed opportunity. Early 2022 saw tourism events restart, discussions raised, concrete moves considered. Research on destination recoveries commenced, although with a 2-year lag compared to other regions, highlighting how hard and perhaps slow the recovery analysis was for APAC.
Other challenges mentioned under the pandemic's umbrella include the dot-com crash, which had its wildest impact on Asia, leading to around 50% budget shortfalls for PATA, described vividly as a death spiral.
Wow. Yeah. Government funding limitations are noted as an ongoing battle. Anticipated mergers and acquisitions of chapters were seen as potential business and market share losses, and there were perceived high levels of control and unbalanced load on secretariats, with output deemed low compared to expected outcomes from provider stake in funding. So a whole complex mix of long-standing and unprecedented challenges piling up.
Charting the course ahead, then. PATA operates within a rapidly changing global landscape and dynamic industry. The sources note that while travel demand is recovering, it's not doing so uniformly. It's patchy.
The pandemic, interestingly, raised awareness of the necessity to address mental health issues in destination management planning, not just physical safety. That's a big shift.
Flexible working arrangements emerging as a permanent fixture, impacting corporate travel culture. And there's a clear rise of conscientious travel, the desire for a positive impact on people and planet, extending that traditional host environment caring role.
These trends, the sources say, necessitate stronger capacity for authorities, stakeholders, investors, which is discussed through specialized forums. After 70 years, maintaining its position as a premier and trusted partner requires PETA to take a comprehensive yet selective, considerate yet nimble approach.
Recent market shifts and trends clearly evidence the need for an association forum for discussion and collaboration. However, the sources note a key challenge. PETA's geographic agnosticity may result in overstretching and watering down its finite and limited resources.
What does that mean exactly, geographic agnosticity? And how do they balance having that global view with limited capacity?
That phrase seems to capture the tension of trying to be relevant everywhere across a vast region, and maybe even beyond, potentially at the cost of depth or focus, spreading themselves too thin, maybe. The sources emphasize that because of this risk, it's of utmost importance for PETA to carefully curate and side stream trends and topics for engagement, ensuring member participation and consensus before aggressively engaging, for example, on resilience frameworks that are primarily UN concepts implemented by UN bodies. Don't jump on every bandwagon.
This ties back to that pivot we discussed in sustainability, doesn't it?
Exactly. The sources reiterate PETA must focus its renewed capacities on stimulating and guiding discussions, not being the doer or direct implementer. The special seminar at the 2023 PETA Annual Summit examining supply-side issues across Asia-Pacific and SIs is presented as an example of this guiding role.
Adapting to industry changes has always been fundamental. The industry is guided by organizations responding to specific needs, and these needs change over the years, directly influencing an organization's structure and operation.
Local organizations recognize functions better handled by a collective. The requirements of commercial operators don't always dominate community operations, and the sources note larger operations sometimes sprang from this recognition.
PETA is described as a volume organization that has had to constantly adapt its structure and operations to changing territories and industry shifts. Understanding its formative years, as covered in these sources, provides crucial background and influence for PETA and other organizations.
It grew from recognizing the need for natural mobile organizations that could function in a guiding or advisory capacity. Early challenges included encouraging travel versus the protectionist policies of some countries. Output and publicity responsiveness were initially a scarcely recognized function.
And to avoid being controlled by either promoting or government interests, the sources explicitly state that equal representation was given to all sections on the council and committees as far as practicable. That's a significant structural detail aimed at balancing power internally.
Looking at innovative approaches, PETA's marketing achievements over the years, area promotion, publicity, films, publications, convention marketing, the International Year of Travel and Tourism, planning workshops have been recognized globally and widely acclaimed.
It's seen by many as a pioneer, a trend maker, operating with evergreen enthusiasm and dynamic vigor. Their operational planning approach has even been described as unique among world tourism organizations. Examining this uniqueness, the sources suggest, relates fundamentally to PETA's philosophy.
The sources state that PETA's philosophy cannot be separated from the operating history of the Executive Office, which has always been one of change and development, responding to external opportunities and pressures. It's not static, it evolves continuously.
In the early years, industry overviews and reviews were sparse, providing little background for information or approaching members for promotion or assistance. The philosophy is seen as a set of ideas and propositions, an explanatory framework for marketing and strategy, which has had to evolve continuously with time and changing circumstances.
PETA has also worked to shape policy and engage communities within the region. In 1994, the sources note, it announced a reorientation of its policy and advocacy efforts to upgrade its role in Asia-Pacific tourism advocacy.
This was in recognition that emerging economies were maturing, offering quality tourism, leading to intense competition. PETA aimed to enhance recognition as the voice of tourism in Asia-Pacific by emphasizing research and advocacy on key issues and challenges and on regional and sub-regional planning.
PETA technologies were even noted by delegations at a UN General Assembly meeting. Director Dale Moss's work post-September 11th, presenting and co-producing a video on needed actions for the travel industry, is highlighted as a key advocacy moment, really stepping up.
The 2003 Executive Board meeting in NYC was particularly significant. The sources state they called for an international year of sustainable tourism for development and appealed for media and government recognition of tourism's global vulnerability, especially relevant after 9/11.
Briefings were sent to member countries, and the sources note that destinations receive tremendous free publicity where news media operate, partially thanks to these efforts. Techniques were developed to raise awareness of tourism media vulnerability and establish agency director networks globally.
They promoted new IPADAs, presumably local chapters or groups, to offer coverage to destinations without presence. A meeting in Guatemala with representatives from all regions followed a members' mega message to discuss commercial and policy advocacy. A regional advocacy approach was deemed essential for full agreement and practical implementation.
PETA's ongoing work with destinations and data analysis is seen as useful for developing agreements on proactive issues across the region.
Regarding policy influence, the sources note that over time, APAC travel and tourism was recognized as a serious matter needing attention from both governments and the private sector. That first meeting in San Francisco in 1950 with leading travel orgs aimed to present Pacific areas as future trendsetters and assist the U.S. and U.K.
Members were even asked to contribute $10,000 cash as seed money. When PACHA was founded in LA in April '51, leaders of founding potential members were invited as honorary members. At an interim meeting in Tokyo, the HQ was selected. Shigeyoshi Hisa became the first exec secretary.
The organization's statutes were approved by consulting firm lawyers who helped start it. And here's that critical point from the sources again. This process ensured that the travel and tourism business of the Pacific areas was to be controlled by the big business interests of the founding members. That's a direct statement about the early power structure. What does that tell us about the kind of organization PATA was intended to be from the start?
It strongly suggests it was set up, at least initially, to serve the interests of the major players who initiated it, rather than perhaps being a purely neutral body representing everyone equally from day one. The Secretary General was the appointee of the sponsoring agency. Japan was made accountable. It emphasizes specific interests were at the helm early on. It's a key detail from the sources about its origins and power dynamics.
Makes sense. In terms of community engagement, PATA sees community broadly connecting people, diverse meanings. Their mission is to strengthen connections for people, communities, their aspirations, and visitors through mutual promotion, exchange of techniques and ideas. While progress is inspiring, the sources note threats are looming.
PATA identified gaps in how advocacy could amplify members' efforts for community good, and how PATA was positioned to work for immediate solutions. They started proactively engaging with communities on awareness raising, like how visitors can stretch their dollar locally, and capacity building to amplify impact and sustainability.
An Access Tourism documentary, funded by an agency, is mentioned, emphasizing respect, connecting more inclusive destinations, aiming for aspirational behavioral change, even something specific like encouraging a male-dominated workforce to see female visitors differently. Interesting detail.
They conducted a COVID recovery destination capacity building program once vaccines were available, plans to ramp up. A 200-page free guidebook on experiences across APAC locations as catalysts for positive change is distributed to the travel trade.
PATA is also working with destinations via the Asia-Pacific Clean Tourism Alliance on flagship initiatives and communication, aiming for outcomes that benefit the communities. There's a recognized need for awareness of programs to help destinations respond to new stresses and elevate the definition of success beyond just visitor numbers.
Internally, they've reconvened their Destination Community Advisory Group into broader advocacy efforts. The sources note that refining high-level community advocacy and promotion needs input from the membership base in 2023. It's an ongoing process.
Their advocacy work enlists passionate volunteers with decades of experience to transition from advisors to advocates for the good of communities within the industry. PATA intends to champion these communities' aspirations via industry influencers for the benefits of said communities and the industry as a whole.
Community engagement is clearly recognized as both a personal and team effort, integral to their updated mission.
PATA has also built consistently close relationships with governments across the region and beyond, recognizing their critical role in developing tourism and catalyzing economic and social change.
The sources described governments as distinguished partners with whom PATA has frequent communication and cooperation. PATA often represents tourism authorities and receives invitations from governmental and intergovernmental institutions.
Panel discussions at PATA events frequently cover significant topics relevant to government's terrorism, political unrest, industry sustainability, climate change, often featuring expert speakers.
PATA is invited to voice opinions on tourism policies and concerns in various countries and regions, and offer opinions on proposed tourism projects when governments are in a dilemma, analyzing situations, outlining alternative approaches with costs and benefits, acting as a kind of trusted advisor.
They've supported member government proposals for visitor statistics compilation and publication, and advocated for an international convention on assurance after attending an expert conference.
PATA has also hosted regional seminars on attractions, like special events in 1982, and was officially designated as the sponsoring org for a significant event in 1986. This really highlights their collaborative role in policy formulation and development at various levels, acting as a bridge between governments and the industry.
Building expertise within the region's tourism workforce has been a natural outgrowth of PATA's programs over the years. They've offered members various educational opportunities.
Yeah, this includes training courses, indoctrination, seminars on marketing, educational opportunities specifically for airline and hotel personnel, training programs and study tours for executives, discussions on safety standards for aircraft airports, integrating transport needs, related studies, a whole range.
They also co-sponsored seminars with other organizations on specialized aspects of travel, safety, transportation formats. This varied program ran until about the mid-1970s.
However, the sources note that in the late 70s and early 80s, despite a growth in seminars and materials, there was a loss of PATA organized training and encouragement for this phase. Why did that happen? Did they just drop it?
The sources suggest it was due to a re-examination prompted by costs, the level of HQ support required, and the need to update the programs. It led to the goal of a more focused approach, recognizing that the global educational needs were, quote, discouragingly vast.
Right, can't boil the ocean. So PATA set goals in broader categories like trans-Pacific educational training initiatives.
Early in their history, the sources show PATA recognized the need for a professional educational program for the region. At a February 1952 exec board meeting, the need for education was discussed, specifically establishing a PATA educational committee to improve tourism via education.
The first education committee was officially established October 21, 1952, chairman and members named. Its initial aims were to produce a program for the upcoming 53 conference and recommend technical training programs.
PATA's first formal educational programs launched at the third conference in Saigon in 1954, Educational Institute sessions for the travel trade, general session on aviation industry developments. Industry officers presented on regional problems.
In July 1955, a resolution was passed at the fourth PATA conference in Hawaii, specifically on the need to develop affordable training and education programs. The Tourism Education Committee, or TEC, later outlined a four-part plan for improving tourism education.
Looking at scholarship opportunities, the sources show a growth in these over the years, aimed at being inclusive of both developed and developing destinations. In September 1995, global scholarships were established to assist prospective students from Pacific Asia entering tourism and hospitality.
Initially, funds were linked for students of Kingston Business School and local educational establishments running diploma or degree programs, though this later shifted to a less focused approach.
Global scholarships were offered for attendance at the annual international conference and internships at association or consumer chapter offices in 1998, with winners selected in 1999. In 2000, the first student-initiated Greater China Market Scholarship was introduced, and they even explored a gay preference business and leisure environment scheme, though it sounds like that was exploratory.
The sources include the specific detail that the uptake on group purchase funding for visit requests in 1998 was unfortunately not applied for and ever undesired.
Huh. That's interesting. Not every initiative lands as planned, even with good intentions. Shows the reality.
Regional and special scholarships became more dominant from 1999 onwards. In 2001, the IATA PATA Scholarship was created, highlighting the importance of aviation and tourism integration again.
This all culminated significantly in 2002, with about $30,000 of various scholarships awarded to 77 individuals across 13 countries, covering different levels and types of programs, including first-time attendees getting free registration. It shows a considerable commitment to building the future workforce in the region through education and access.
PATA has a long tradition of celebrating excellence in the industry through its annual awards program, which began in 1970 with 5 categories.
Categories like tourism research and most dedicated member organization were added later, some discontinued over time.
Currently, the sources say there are 22 awards honoring contributions to operational initiatives across areas like PR, marketing, eco-spirit. Pretty broad.
Eligibility generally requires PATA membership of at least 2 years. Board directors or award committee members can nominate. The sources specify that agents or reps of nominating orgs are excluded from receiving awards themselves. Keeps it objective, maybe?
Nominations require sufficient info demonstrating what was done, how, why it represents excellence. Implementation must be in the last full calendar year. Judging is at PATA's discretion, with the award committee and board reviewing and shortlisting.
They look for significant contributions to the APAC industry, and the sources note that peer acceptance is perhaps the greatest accolade for recipients. Recipients of the prestigious Awards of Merit are picked by what's described as an exalted group of eminent industry personalities.
The first Award of Merit was presented in 1971, and a roster of high-ranking persons have been chosen since.
The annual awards ceremony is a major highlight of the year, manifested at the annual conference gala dinner. Winners receive a plaque and, interestingly, a hand-painted tote bag with pins and books. Nice touch.
Categories include Grand and Gold Awards for outstanding achievement in specific APAC areas selected as the best of the best from merit recipients. Incorporation awards recognize promoting PATA growth. The President's Award of Excellence is given at the sitting president's discretion for long, outstanding service. And the Travel Industry Hero Award recognizes individuals for outstanding service or accomplishment beyond what's expected, judged on 4 criteria.
The Tourism for Tomorrow Awards, in association with UNEP, specifically recognize and celebrate sustainable development efforts globally. Candidates are worldwide, evaluated on 5 criteria, regional and global selections. Finalists get a certificate, winners a trophy.
There are some really notable award recipients mentioned. The inaugural PATA Grand Travel Award went to Lawrence D. Macaulay from the U.S. Dept of Commerce for a TV series on U.S. attractions. First PATA Gold Award in '74 was for a documentary film about Santa Cruz Island.
There was, the sources say, an immediate need for annual Grand Travel Awards to encourage tourism, films, and media, explicitly stating these awards should exclude travelogues. They wanted substance.
The Blue PATA Award for Hospitality went to several hotel managers, and the president of the National Tourism Association of the U.S. Grand Award winners included a TV network, a tourist board, hotels.
The Golden Elephant Award for Architectural Achievement in a Hotel first went to the iconic Raffles Hotel, Singapore, and the Hotel King Edward in Toronto, recognizing quality builds.
At the annual meeting in New Delhi, the Gold PATA Award went to the Hilton Hawaii. Awards included recognition for a tourist center, a film festival. Notable Grand Travel Award recipients also included national tourist organizations.
But perhaps the most unusual award mentioned is from 1973. The sources state an optional Reverse Grand Plus PATA Grand Travel Award was created, and the award went to the King of Thailand.
Yes, the sources explicitly state this award went to the King of Thailand for undergoing sufficient travel of his kingdom, or at least having a satellite dish installed at the palace.
Okay, hold on. The King of Thailand received a travel award for traveling within his own country, or maybe just getting TV. What was the criteria there? What does that tell us about the thinking behind awards in that era?
It certainly wasn't your standard tourism award criteria. The sources don't elaborate on the specific rationale beyond that, but it definitely highlights a very different era of tourism promotion and potentially using awards in, well, unexpected ways to draw attention or perhaps flatter key figures and destinations. It's one of those surprising details that really brings the history to life, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, digital transformation. PATA's evolution inevitably intersected with technological innovations, advancements, requiring adaptations, bringing possibilities and challenges.
The sources describe PATA going through its own digital transformation, driven by both necessity and foresight.
They trace the changing trends in travel and tech. From the early 20th century through the 1980s, faster vehicles fostering long-distance travel, passenger aviation rising. But digitization, they say, is truly transforming the very foundations of travel today.
The advent of computerized reservation systems, CRS, in the early 80s brought computer-assisted processes into travel companies, fundamentally modifying business relationships, a huge step.
This was followed by the spread and diversification of personal computers, devices, plus the internet, making digital computing a mass phenomenon embraced by consumers and professionals alike.
The World Wide Web, in particular, dramatically changed the nature, structure, use of information. Altering the very foundations of the travel agency business, the sources call it a paradigm shift that is still evolving.
At the destination level, new information channels opened up, dramatically changing the nature of destination marketing organizations, DMOs, making them less controllable, more porous, less top-down.
The sources address how PATA grappled with these effects on distribution and marketing, examining the very notion of the market in terms of supply and demand. They look at actors providing public goods in a competitive market, fostering growth via cooperative market knowledge creation, noting DMOs typically have public governance structures.
Current conditions, they say, are characterized by the complexity of digitalization, increased competitiveness, multiple paths forward, and sustainable development acting as a necessary boundary condition. A much more complex world.
PATA's initial online resources and tools were developed gradually, becoming daily functions used internally or shared. The sources note the first 2 items listed in this category relate to crisis management functions.
Yeah, when disaster-affected members, PATA would formulate a response, ascertain crucial info, collate it, disseminate it quickly to members and humanitarian organizations. Examples given include preparing resources after the Taiwan earthquake and PETA reportedly being the first to disseminate updated info after a significant eruption, playing a vital communication role.
They also developed an electronic bulletin board called the Asia Travel Information Desk, described as the first computer conferencing service in Asia for pre-recorded discussions, introduced in February of some year to interest industry professionals. Ahead of the curve there.
Topics were sometimes named after crises or itineraries. Discussions were later transferred to print summaries or transcripts sent by surface mail and archived on the bulletin board system, the BBS.
An information service was also developed to produce copy about resorts, facilities, service industries, cities, requiring about 2 weeks' notice, covering only new items, actively encouraging destinations to participate. It covered parts of Japan, Korea, Pacific Islands.
But here's a really surprising detail, maybe the most surprising tech detail. The sources explicitly state that PETA's first foray into the digital world is cited as 1980, specifically with, wait for it, fax machines.
Fax machines, yes. They were initially regarded as an interesting, cheap form of communication. The first contact-like fax was reportedly received in August 1980. Despite skepticism from some PETA personnel compared to telephones, initial impressions were positive.
So PETA's big leap into digital started with faxes. That seems incredibly basic from today's perspective, almost quaint.
It does, but the sources note that by the end of that year, half a dozen were installed at HQ and used as a primary means of communication with members. And they make the point that Asia was actually at the forefront of this fax revolution at the time. It allowed PETOS to stay closer to its regional members than organizations relying on slower methods like mail.
That gives you a sense of how quickly technology was changing things, even then. A fax was revolutionary.
Absolutely. The next crucial innovation the sources mention was the personal desktop computer in the early 1980s, which generated widespread excitement. Initially used just for administration, it later allowed the design and production of publications to move in-house, culminating with the 8990 yearbook.
However, they note that computers were limited to admin initially. Little management or researcher understanding or experience on how they could improve R&D output. The potential wasn't fully grasped yet.
And then, of course, the World Wide Web opened up vast new resources and tools, first for PETA itself, then for the wider industry. The website became a key platform to aggregate public content like conference programs.
They started using sophisticated tools for targeting information. Researchers shared data with the design team, creating new formats and appearances for publications. Things started looking more modern.
The internet is described as probably the most critical technological tool, fundamentally changing how PETA found, assembled, organized, presented data and info. A range of services, utilities, software were integrated and enhanced, protocols developed, an in-house server installed to combine material, a complete transformation.
It's a clear trajectory of how PETA navigated and embraced the digital wave over decades, starting from those humble but apparently vital fax machines.
So, in conclusion, wrapping things up a bit, the sources show that the 1970s marked a new phase for PETA, heightened emphasis on interregional cooperation and the broader processes of globalization, looking outwards more.
Tenuous stability in East Asia was perceived as a basis for further tourism development, though strenuous competition was definitely anticipated.
Upheavals in the Middle East, developing Africa, Latin America, these were seen as potential threats to long-haul travel to the Pacific at the time, external factors always playing a role.
The 1980s saw PETA incorporate various significant committees and councils, a dedicated regional marketing committee, councils for Asian tourist boards, international airlines. They formed a Japanese chapter, reflecting the growing importance of that market.
Concern for regional security was a topic at council meetings. The 1983 Kuala Lumpur conference drew attention to the necessity for a clear policy on disaster recovery. PETA was perceived as the chief agency for resistant marketing efforts in the face of challenges, helping the region bounce back.
This was evident in 1985 during Australia's Southeast Asian crisis, compounded by a plunge in the Aussie dollar. The resistance campaign that followed, initiated within PETA and later adopted by the UNWTO, was believed to be effective in mitigating the impact.
In 1993, PETA expanded its remit by establishing an environmental committee. Concern over environmental degradation began to be voiced, primarily regarding development effects rather than pollution resource shortages initially. Environmental issues seen as potential barriers to development, a growing awareness.
So if we trace the whole arc the sources lay out, from this small group driven by one man's frustration about empty seats, focused on promoting air travel to the Pacific, PETA navigated decades marked by massive geopolitical shifts, economic crises, technological revolutions.
And it consistently adapted its structure, membership, marketing approaches, core focus, shifting from direct implementation in areas like sustainability to a more guiding role, evolving its information systems from faxes to sophisticated digital hubs. Constant change.
It's clear from your sources that PETA has been a crucial voice and player in navigating the complexities of developing tourism in one of the world's most dynamic regions, deeply intertwined with global events, economic forces, and the changing nature of travel itself.
Yeah, a fascinating journey.
So we've journeyed from the very beginnings of PETA, rooted in that one man's frustration about empty seats and the huge challenge of making travel accessible, through its evolution across major geopolitical shifts, economic storms, technological revolutions. Quite a ride.
We really have. We've seen how it built that unique membership network, how it innovated in marketing with stories and later digital tools, championed sustainable tourism, even making that significant pivot to hand implementation initiatives to the UN at one point.
Right. Navigated crises like oil shocks and, of course, a global pandemic, and consistently aimed to advocate for the region and its communities.
It's clear that organizations like PETA aren't just static entities promoting brochures, are they? They are dynamic bodies, deeply intertwined with global events, economic forces, the constantly changing nature of travel itself, constantly adapting to stay relevant and impactful.
Absolutely. So as you continue your own learning journey, here's a final thought to leave you with. Building on PETA's history of adapting to immense change and its declared pivot from being a doer to a stimulator and guider in areas like sustainability.
Okay, how might future unforeseen global challenges, perhaps something even larger than the last pandemic, or maybe the escalating impacts of climate change on destinations, how might these fundamentally redefine the core purpose and operational focus of international travel associations like PETA in the years to come?
That's a big question, something to definitely mull over.